today is the fourth and last lecture in our series handling the topic importance of theory for practice that liberate the mind. In the three previous lectures we were more concerned with the theory, especially the study of Vaisha, the study of the Vigyapti Matrata, of Chitta Matrata, actually is quite demanding as far as theory is concerned. It necessitates a certain knowledge of Abhidharma. That's why in the olden times the students of Vaisha, are you having any problem with the students of Vaisha? They had to study Abhidharma first before going into the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra Iche Shutilun and finally Cheng Vaishalun. So actually the study of Vigyapti Matrata, the study of Vaisha, has the stage of Sitsa Shu, that means based on the Siwei, on the wisdom based on hearing, Wen Suo Cheng Zhihui, Gen Si Suo Cheng Zhihui, wisdom based on contemplation. Then one absorbs what one has learned by the Shu Suo Cheng Hui. And actually it is the Shu Suo Cheng Hui, it is the wisdom from meditation that allows one the direct realization of the mind only. Now, we should know that mind only is, for those who study the mind only philosophy, mind only is actually, it is not a theory. Same like emptiness is not a theory, it has to be a direct experience. Only then it becomes the valid means of knowledge. We also should know that in Indian philosophy, among others, the Samadhi is considered in all Indian traditions related to yoga, including Buddhism, is the valid means of knowledge, is pramana. So study Yogacara, and it is not by accident that Yogacara is called Yogacara. Yogacara literally means the conduct in accordance with yoga. This is Yogacara. And yoga ultimately means the study of samadhi. So the Yogacara system, the mind-only system, actually is a system based on the investigation of the experience of samadhi. Now, in the Buddhist tradition, simply speaking, yoga means the practice of shamatha and vipassana. So the study of Yogacara ultimately boils down to the practice of shamatha and vipassana with the object being the mind. And the mind is, on one hand, in this tradition, it is the ultimate reality, it is the Genru, it is the Tatata, and the mind is also the conventional reality. So both conventional reality and the ultimate reality are to be found in mind. So the own nature of the mind is, on one hand, the own characteristics of the dharmas, and the own nature of the mind is also the tathata, the ultimate reality, the suchness, the genru, the ruru. Now, in Buddhism, it is very important in the development of Buddhism, we have a dichotomy between the analytical approach to reality, represented by the Abhidharma Sarvastivada Yoga and Theravada Abhidharma, which emphasize on the analytical approach. The analytical approach, as Abhidharma Kosha teaches, we can only remove the defilements by jietsu, by dharma pravichaya. Dharma pravichaya antarena nasti klesha prahanaya upaya, says the Abhidharma Kosha. There is no other skillful means for abandoning the defilements, the veil of defilements, beside the dharma pravichaya, beside the analysis of the dharma. Now, as we all know, in the Mahayana tradition, the attention from the analytical approach turns to the non-analytical approach, from the Fen Pie Zhi Hui to Wu Fen Pie Zhi Hui. Now, in order to understand Buddhism, of course, we need both. We need the analytical wisdom and we need the non-analytical wisdom. All Buddhist traditions agree that we actually understand the conventional reality according to the truth only when we have the direct experience of the ultimate reality. This is very important to understand. And the direct experience of the ultimate reality in the agamas, in the Abhidharma, comes from the Dharma Pravichaya, from the analysis of the Dharmas. So, first, we have to learn shamatha. Then we can analyze the dharmas based on samadhi, on the vipassana samadhi. Then the door for realization is open. This is the traditional way of looking. Now, eventually, the Northern Buddhism or Mahayana Buddhism, or how we call it, the Bodhisattva path, based on the Transcendental Wisdom Sutras, starts to emphasize the direct experience of the non-analytical wisdom. It is the non-analytical wisdom finally which brings clarity, and we do not need necessarily to analyze the dharmas directly. We can understand the concepts. Only through understanding the concepts, it is enough to know actually the meanings of the dharmas. So the Abhidharma study in Northern Buddhism especially became more scholastic study. And this is, so to say, the situation almost to the present day. We study Abhidharma as a scholastic discipline. But this was not the case in the early times. The Abhidharma was object of study of samadhi. This is very important. In Xuanzang's time still, the Abhidharma was the object of study of samadhi. Later, the picture has changed. So that's why the theoretical knowledge, you have to have a concept, then you realize the concept in samadhi. This is the study of Abhidharma. This is the process of study of Abhidharma. This is also explained in this way in the Yogacara Bhumi Sastra, Yiche Shutilun. How do you realize the ultimate reality according to Yiche Shutilun? The first, you realize that all that we know about reality, we know through the image of reality. This is very important to understand. So we know reality by the image. From the Yogacara point of view, even the objects of wisdom explained in the Abhidharma, like Abhidharma Kosha, Theravada Abhidharma, starts by explaining the objects of wisdom, the 5 aggregates, the 12 bases, the 18 elements, and so on, dependent origination, 4 noble truths. They are the objects of wisdom. For the early Buddhism, they are the real objects. For the Yogacara, they are conventional objects. Very important to understand. Now, we have, in order to understand Yogacara and Yogacara meditation, we have to understand 3 realities. The unreal reality, and unreal reality is that reality in which is, so to say, transmitted to us through the name. That is the unreal reality, the Kya reality. Then we have the real reality, which is Shi Ching Te Shi, the Vastu, the base for reality, and that is, of course, here the image. But the image based on the direct experience, not on the name. Then on this image we impose, this image is transmitted to us, so to say, directly. We do not need any name for that image, it is directly transmitted to us. When we name the image, we, from the point of view of Yogacara, we divide the reality. If we don't name the image, we don't divide the reality. To understand the Yogacara meditation, this is the most important base. We are in the divided reality because we impose name on the reality. Now, all Buddhist traditions agree that the object of our defilements are the concepts, not the reality, not the real vastu, not the real basis. But as far as the Abhidharma is concerned, I mean the Abhidharma of the Shravaka path, of the path of the disciples, there is nothing wrong in orienting oneself about the nature of reality by naming it. But the naming reality becomes an obstacle in the Yogacara, in the Bodhisattva path. Becomes the obstacle because by naming we divide the reality, which is in its very nature. And the nature of reality is to be found in the mind itself. We have mentioned that. The reality itself is non-divisible. It becomes divisible by imposing the name. So the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra goes as far as saying that imposing the name on reality is to be understood as the dukkha satya, as the truth of suffering. We know that generally in Buddhism the truth of suffering is based on the truth of accumulation, truth of attachment, desire, but the Yogacara extends this concept to naming. So when we name something, we impose on reality the idea of what Buddhism calls self-existent nature, zishin. Now, as long as we don't have a direct realization of the ultimate reality, then our differentiation of reality is based on the spontaneous idea of the objects of differentiation having a self-existent nature. This is a very deep tendency in our mind, which is in a way responsible for our defilements. So how does, according to Yogacara, a bodhisattva starts a way towards a realization? By adimoksha, by resolution, shenjie. He resolves to practice non-dualistic path by giving rise to the vows. I liberate not only myself but all beings. I don't remove my defilements but the defilements of all beings. I study all dharmas, not only the dharmas leading to nirvana, and I attain the highest Buddhahood, that means a non-dualistic Buddhahood, the omniscience in all aspects. So this is the beginning of the Yogacara practice. This is the beginning of the Vigyapti Matrata practice. Now we also know that Vigyapti Matrata or Vaisha is in a Chinese tradition connected with the so-called Dharma Lakshana school, Faxiang school, introduced by Xuanzang and his disciples. And the Faxiang school and the Yogacara, Vaisha, some scholars consider them to be practically identical. Some scholars differentiate them. Actually, they are neither exactly the same, they also cannot be differentiated, they are complementary. Studying Vaisha in Chinese tradition means to study Faxiang, to study the Dharma Lakshana. Studying Dharma Lakshana should not be separated from studying the Vaisha. This is a peculiarity of the Chinese Buddhism. So, Vaisha adopts the Vaisha emphasis is on the non-differentiating wisdom. The Faxiang Dharma Lakshana emphasis is on the differentiating wisdom. And the non-differentiating wisdom and the differentiating wisdom should be in the Bodhisattva path, eventually absorbed as being complementary, not as being one opposing the other. This is the ultimate achievement, when they become one. When they become one, then the highest realization of the Buddha is the relative truth, and the highest truth is actually one truth. The Buddha ultimately in all Buddhist tradition has taught only one truth. And one truth is the identity of the relative truth and of the highest truth. This is what is to be realized. And one realizes it first by the resolution to practice the non-dualistic path. This is called in Yogacara Bhumi Shastra, J, which literally means holding. When you hold this resolution, then you practice Yonisho Manasikara. You practice the attention based in the truth. In Chinese, Ru Li Zuo Yi. Attention based in truth already introduces you into the non-dualistic approach. Actually, the real existence of objects outside are based on the dualistic understanding which comes from so to say, imposing name on the pictures of reality. When we impose a name on the pictures of reality, we get a dualistic reality. And we get the idea that that which is outside is different from that which is inside. This has to be broken. And breaking this is actually based on the Yonisho Manasikara, on the so the original meaning of Yonisho Manasikara in Abhidharma means what is the attention based on reality. Attention based on reality is what kind of attention? Is the attention that all the elements of reality are impermanent, wuchang? What is impermanent cannot be ultimate happiness, is dukkha. What is dukkha cannot be self. So this is the attention based in reality. Unless one has this attention, so the agamas explain, one cannot get anulomika khanti, one cannot get, the sutras say that without seeing the impermanence of all the formations, of all the sankharas, one cannot get the anulomika kshanti, shun ren. That means the tolerance of the state of things as they really are. It says that without seeing the impermanence of all formations, it is impossible, na etat thanam vijati, it is impossible that one is endowed samanagato anulomika khantiya, with the ability to accept reality as it really is. And the reality as it really is impermanence and the suffering of impermanence. So the first, one has to accumulate certain good qualities. This is the Sambhara Marga, the path of accumulation. Then one can go into the path of effort, Prayoga Marga, Tyashin Tao. And here we are in the Tyashin Tao by practicing in the path of effort, by practicing the right attention based in reality. Now, in the Yogacara system, in the Mahayana system, the meaning of the attention based in reality is extended to the three realities. When we get the realization, we understand these three realities together. As long as we are not realized, they always separated. We have to see very clearly how this fabricated reality, parikalpita, that is pianchi shing, imposes duality, imposes self-existent nature on the mind, where there is no self-existent nature whatsoever. The self-existent nature belongs to the highest reality, not to the relative. So, first, in order to get realization, one has to see this reality of imposition of names. By imposition of names, we mean the imposition of a self-existent nature on the objects of our perception, on the objects of our contact through the six senses. And this imposition happens due to the mental consciousness. And according to Yogacara, this mental consciousness has a base in manas, which is, so to say, the link of our differentiation to the reality of alaya, which is the resultant consciousness. And we experience reality through the resultant consciousness. Our reality is different because our resultant consciousness is different. Because our resultant consciousness is different, our alaya is different, then we base on sensation, we impose different concepts on reality. So first, in order to understand the Yogacara Samadhi, one has to concentrate on the mind and see very clearly how we impose on the reality either clinging, which is called samaropa, the self-existent nature, or non-nature, apavada, on the reality of images, on the reality of dependent origination. The reality of images is, so to say, interpreted by the mental consciousness based on manas by names. And we hold to these names as a reality. This is what is to be seen very clearly by studying the mind. So, first step in understanding the Vaishya is to see very clearly in Samadhi. In Yogacara Bhumi Shastra, it is called the Samadhi of Attaining Light, Te Kwan San Mei. Seeing very clearly how we impose the self-existent nature and duality on our perception, on our sensations, through the intermediary of naming. Because we name the relative reality, we either impose something to be held, which is called samaropa, zheng-yi, or something to be taken away from it, which is called apavada. This complex has to be seen very clearly in one's mind to understand the dependent origination as it really is. The dependent origination deprived of names. So there are many comparisons in scriptures to understand this process. Say in Trisvabhava, Nirdesha and so on, we have elephant, which is not a real elephant but a wooden elephant. Understanding the elephant as a wooden elephant is to understand the dependent origination. And finally, when we understand the dependent origination, we understand that wood is just wood. Similarly, seeing a snake in the darkness, we believe rope to be snake in the darkness. This snake in the darkness is actually from the very beginning just a rope. But because our sight is blurred, is not clear, so we take the rope for a snake. So we take the reality of dependent origination as something which is to be grasped or which is to be abandoned. Not abandoned, which is to be negated. So the first, we have to know clearly, pariññaya, the reality of parikalpita, the reality of fabrication of self-existent nature. This is the first step. Then this fabrication has to be abandoned. Same like the samudaya satya, like the truth of accumulation. Through the truth of accumulation, we have to abandon the truth of accumulation to get rid of suffering. Then we can directly realize the ultimate reality, which is called in Yogacara Parinishpana, the Yuen Cheng and it can be only realized by cultivating the path. And cultivating the path is cultivating the path of non-dual vision, cultivating the Genja, the Samprajanya, the awareness of on one hand the facts, the vastu, what are the real basis of our experience. That means in the Yogacara the reality of own characteristics, relative own characteristics of the objects, the hardness of the earth, the fact of receiving the object as a sensation, fact of taking the image of the object as perception and so on. These are the facts. These are the basis. The facts are the basis. And the Bodhisattva is one who practices a basis. And these bases do not need the names. This is called the In Yogacara, yavat bhavikata, that means the tin suoyo, that means as far as we can distinguish reality in terms of its own characteristics. Then we have the reality of suchness itself, yatha bhavikata reality, Ru, Suoyo, Xing, and this is the ultimate reality. And the way to realize this ultimate reality, to see the real basis, and these real bases are, even in the Agamas, they are called sadhisa. They are like the ultimate reality. So the ultimate reality has two aspects: the relative aspect and the highest aspect. So when we see these two aspects, we see the whole. And when we see the whole, we can see the three realities together. This is the ultimate realization in the Mahayana, in the Yogacara path. We can see the process of imposing names on the reality and see very clearly the illusionary nature of names. We can see at the same time the reality of images, which is true, but which exists in relation to the names, in relation to the memory. And we can also see the ultimate reality, which is completely free from the imposition of the names. So what is the difference between the enlightened person and the non-enlightened person? You will find the same idea in the Agamas. Enlightened person is using the names, using the concepts, without any tendency to attachment. The non-enlightened person uses the names, uses the concepts with attachment. This is the difference. And from the Yogacara point of view, enlightened person is the one who can see these three realities: fabricated reality, parikalpita, the dependent reality, paratantra, literally meaning that which depends on other, and the ultimate reality, which is completely deprived of the concepts, of the names. But deprived does not mean the Buddha, the enlightened person, does not use the names. He uses them to bring others to the other shore, to bring others beyond suffering. This is the correct use of the names. Now, the non-enlightened person is using the names to cause suffering to himself and to others. The enlightened person uses the names, uses the concept to free himself of suffering and to help others to free themselves of suffering. one who understands this understands clearly the Yogacara meditation, the Mahayana aspect of the realization practice. Actually, all this you will find in a rudimentary form in the early scriptures, in the Agamas, but this is developed in the Yogacara. So it is explained precisely how one practices. So the first step is resolution, second step is, it is called in Yogacara Zuo. Actually, Zuo means Juli Zoi, means the attention based on reality. By attention based on reality, that means reality without names. One gets the insight that the outer objects are inseparable from the mind itself. This is called in the Yogacara tradition the attaining the light. The light is naturally coming from the mind itself. It is the light of wisdom. And this light of wisdom appears when the mind turns to itself. And the mind turns to itself is the process of shamatha. Is a process of shamatha first with an object. First, traditionally one practices shamatha with an object in order to turn the mind to the ultimate reality. The ultimate reality is ultimate reality because it is free from image, it is wuxiang, it is signless. That which is freed from holding to any image, that is freed from desire, that is Wu Yuan. Or we can also say Wu Zuo, because ultimately in the ultimate reality there is nothing to be done. And of course, since there is nothing to grasp, then it is empty. And this realization in the Yogacara is linked to the three levels of realities which are to be realized step by step. So the fabricated reality is ultimate emptiness. Ultimate emptiness in the sense that it does not exist. So, realizing the emptiness of the fabricated reality is the samadhi of emptiness in the Yogacara practice. Now, the reality, conventional reality, which we see through the intermediary of the names, has never arisen. That which has never arisen, should not be an object of clinging, should not be an object of desire. So this is the Wu Yuen Samadhi. Wu Yuen Samadhi is connected to the truth of suffering. Through realizing the truth of suffering, through realizing the emptiness of names, you realize the non-desire to reality. And the ultimate reality is the Wuxiang Samadhi, is the Samadhi free from the holding to any image in the mind. When we hold to the image in the mind, we hold to the image because of our memory. This is very important to understand. It is the memory which holds to the image. We do not hold to the present sensation. We hold to linking the present sensation to the past sensation connected with clinging. This is very important to understand. This should be very clear in meditation practice. And this is also the important aspect of the realization process. Without it, the realization process is impossible. So we hold to the objects of memory. An object of memory are indeed the objects connected with our process of imposition of the name, of dividing the reality, of either adding something to the reality of dependent origination or taking something away from it. So when we understand that the reality of dependent origination is the reality to which there is nothing to be added and there is nothing to be taken away from it, we have realized the gate to the ultimate realization, to the non-dualistic realization, which is in the Bodhisattva path the first Bodhisattva Bhumi, called the Pramudita, the joy. The Pramudita actually means the sorrow joy. In Chinese it is translated as Tashi, the great joy of witnessing the non-dualistic nature of our experience. In order to realize this great joy of non-dualistic nature of our experience, according to the Yogacara, the first thing to be learned, as I have mentioned, is a samadhi based on an object, You Xiang San Mei. So, as opposed to most of the present techniques of the Mahayana practice, widely taught in Chinese Buddhism and in Tibetan Buddhism, the Yogacara pays the highest respect to the practice of the traditional dhyanas. The traditional dhyanas, the first, second, third, and fourth dhyana in the subtle forms, and the first, second, third, and fourth dhyana in the formless, which are in the Abhidharma called the 8 samapatis, the 8 attainments, and these 8 attainments, they are explained in the Abhidharma as the Genting, as the genting of the Eightfold Noble Path. This is very often forgotten, but it is very important to emphasize. So why this experience of dhyana is so highly valued in the Yogacara tradition? It is so highly valued because unless you have a dhyana, you won't be able to identify the object of your dhyana in the base consciousness. Call it the Zichengfen, Swasamviti, or call it the Bhavanga, the cause of existence in the Theravada. That is the door of the mind. In this door of the mind, you can then, if you have the dhyana, you can identify the object of your dhyana. Then the next, you identify the object of your dhyana, and you also can identify the mind which goes to the object of the dhyana. So you can use it for, you can use this knowledge for the traditional vipassana, analytical vipassana, in this mind going to the object of the dhyana. You can identify the dhyana angas, the causes of the dhyana, and eventually you can identify all the different mental factors in a wholesome mind, because the dhyana is a wholesome, one-pointed mind. This is the meaning of the dhyana. Now, in the Yogacara tradition, the real process of realization starts, as Yogacara Bhumi Shastra explained, is when the one-pointed mind becomes the object of shamatha and vipassana. When one-pointed mind becomes the object of shamatha and vipassana, you actually go into the depths of the shamatha vipassana process, into the depths of the liberation process. Now, when you have trained on dhyana with an object, then it becomes quite easy to withdraw the object and take the mind itself as the object. And that is, in this tradition, the ultimate shamatha. The ultimate shamatha is when the empty mind, because in the dhyana the mind becomes emptied, in the what is the meaning of the dhyana? Very important to understand. The dhyana is explained as upanidhyana, and dhya comes from the Sanskrit root to think. Dhya means to think. So the dhyana, one would, from the linguistic point of view, think that dhyana means a state of thinking. And actually, in Western tradition, when we speak of meditation, we speak of contemplation of some concepts. That is usually understood as meditation. We contemplate on some concepts. But the ultimate dhyana, actually the dhyana is the state without thinking. What means thinking in this context? The thinking means the mind going to the object. That is thinking. And in order that the mind goes to the object, you need will, and you need applied thought and sustained thought. So this is how the mind goes to the object. Now the applied thought and sustained thought is very necessary for the Vipassana practice, because it keeps the mind attached to the object. And among others, it produces the speech. It is by applying and sustaining the thought at the object, you produce a speech. Very important to understand. So when you speak about something, you are naturally applying and sustaining the mind on that object which you have produced by name. By name, by sentence, by syllables. But in the process of meditation, you don't need to use names, you don't need to use syllables, you don't need to use sentences to sustain your mind at the object. You can sustain it on the image of the object first. When you sustain it on the image of the object, then your sensation does not change. When your sensation does not change, the mind will not change. When the mind will not change, so you can enter the dhyana. Because when the mind does not change, the object also does not change. When the object does not change, it becomes sublimated. Because the mind and sensation also do not change. So that is the meaning of upanidhyana. Upa means near, and upa has also a meaning of negation. So in dhyana you are thinking from near by non-thinking. Non-thinking in terms of names and concepts. And ni in Sanskrit is the emphatic prefix. So you think intensively by negating, actually by getting rid of the names, and you sustain the mind on the image of the objects without the names. So you go to dhyana. Now, in the second dhyana, you don't need anymore the power of applied and sustained thought to maintain your object on the image that you have chosen to practice meditation. And from the second dhyana higher, there is no need anymore for sustained and applied thought. But when you practice vipassana, again you need the sustained and applied thought to distinguish the own characteristics and the common characteristics of the object. Otherwise you can't do that. So we have two kinds of samadhi in Buddhism. One is called Aramana Samadhi, the samadhi based on object, and the Lakhana Samadhi, the samadhi based on the characteristics of the object. In order to get realization, you need both types of samadhi. You need the samadhi based on object without differentiating the characteristics of the objects of the image. And you need a samadhi differentiating the own and common characteristics of the image. So from the Yogacara perspective, the samadhi which differentiates the own and common characteristics of the object leads you to understanding of the relative reality as it really is, and the samadhi without differentiating the characteristic of the object ultimately leads to the non-differentiating samadhi. The non-differentiating samadhi is the object of the realization. This is called in Chinese Buddhism the Kenpen-zhi, the base wisdom. The base wisdom is a non-differentiating wisdom. But this base wisdom has to be connected with what is called the Prishtalabdha Jnana, the wisdom after realization. The real vipassana is this wisdom. Wisdom after realization. What is wisdom after realization? Wisdom after realization is analyzing the basis of our perceptions, of our sensations, without imposition whatsoever of any names or self-existent reality, or of difference or non-difference, of being or non-being. Of opposites whatsoever. So the ultimate realization is that the Fa-Xing, the nature of reality, the suchness, the Fa-Jie, the Dharma Dhatu, the Shi, the ultimate reality, and the character and the reality based on characteristics studied in samadhi actually have to become one whole. So this is the ideal. This is going into, actually according to the Yogacara, we have the ultimate reality, which is nirvana, which is in non-dualistic schools called Tathata Genru. You have the relative reality, and you have the supermundane relative reality. This is the ultimate non-dualistic reality, where the relative and the highest reality merge into one. And they merge into one because you go from the practice of samadhi based on the object into the practice of samadhi without an object. And the practice of samadhi without an object, you practice in this Yogacara tradition after mastering the samadhi with an object. Then you withdraw the object and make the mind free from thinking, free from holding the object itself. And this mind, which is free from thinking, free from object, that is the ultimate reality. And in this ultimate reality, this relative reality is contained. The relative reality is reflected in this mind without an object as it is, like in a mirror. In the Yogacara tradition, this great mirror wisdom is the wisdom of the alaya. When the alaya is understood, from the point of view of this swasamviti aspect, from the point of view of self-realization aspect, then the aspect of the seer and the seen is seen as something unreal. Normally, we always see them as something real. When there is a seer, there is something seen. Because the seer is real, the seen is also real. And seer and seen are real because of the mental consciousness based on the manas. Based on the consciousness which identifies the alaya, be it the darshana bhaga, the seeing aspect of the alaya, as being the self. So in due to the experience of samadhi without an object, one can actually realize the three levels of reality in which we beings find ourselves at the same time. Normally we never see them at the same time. When we pay attention to the name, we don't see how the our dualistic view, our abhuta parikalpa, our Shiwang Fempie is based on the names. We do not see it. So we identify with the seer and the seen. Now, in the stage of the prayoga, in the stage of effort, the meditator has to master the samadhi with an object that is called, in the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra, that is called chin. Chin literally means mirror. When you see the samadhi with an object, you can mirror your object in the mind. Unless you have the samadhi with, you cannot mirror your object in the mind. That is the importance of the dhyana. Because of the dhyana, we can mirror the object in the mind. When you mirror the object in the mind, you get the Ming. Ming means science, knowledge, wisdom. And this science, knowledge, wisdom is the samadhi without an object. This samadhi without an object and the samadhi with an object, they are complementary. They are not something which should be, strictly speaking, seen separately. Because according to Yogacara, you have the process of meditation is a process of breaking the power of the so-called pratibimba, reflected images of the yin-yang. What we understand as a reality is our image, picture of reality. We see a reality through the pictures. And these pictures is what is, this yin-yang is what is distinguished by the mental consciousness. And when we distinguish by the mental consciousness, we already have a dualistic reality. We have the aspect of the seer and the aspect of the seen. Now, in the Yogacara tradition, first you have to understand that the aspect of the seen comes from the aspect of the seer. The aspect of the seen is nothing but the seeds in our consciousness. So, our experience of the world is actually experience of the seer. Is already transmitted through the seer. And it is a seer which creates the nimitta, which creates the signs of the objects, to which we grasp as a reality. And who grasps to them as the reality? It is the manas. It is the manas which takes the alaya or the seer aspect of the alaya as the self. Now, in the stage of realization, we can see all this process at once. We can see the reflected image. We can see how this image is created in the mind by the manas consciousness, which holds to the seer aspect of the alaya as being the self. And this is how we break the power of the reflected image. We beings, we are in the power of the reflected images. When we see it, we enter the process of realization. When we don't see it, this is not a Yogacara realization. The Yogacara realization starts, as the 30 verses of Vasubandhu explain, when you see very clearly that there is no object whatsoever outside that can be grasped. There is a saying in the Zen tradition, if you see as little as a wing of a mosquito, you fall into the darkest hell. This is, of course, a skillful means to understand how our mind works. So the first step to be done is to break the power of the reflected image by seeing very clearly its source. Its source is in the seer itself, not in the seen. The reality comes from the seer. And because of the seer, there is a seen. When the seer is penetrated, the seen becomes unreal. When the seer is not penetrated, the seen will always appear as something stable being there. So, in the words of the Lankavatara Sutra, we beings, we are like the actors on the stage, wearing the mask. The mask, not by accident, is called in English persona, the person. This is a Latin word for person, is mask, persona. So when the actor on the stage is seen through his mask, he retreats because he is shy. Similarly, when the seer is discovered, the seen ceases to be so real, and one becomes shy of holding to the role of the seen. because holding to the scene is actually like playing a role. So the three realities actually is the state of enlightenment in the Yogacara tradition. We see the unreality of the names through which the reality of dependent origination is received by us. We see the real reality of dependent origination based on the vastu, based on the real basis of the relative reality, hardness of the earth, cohesion of the water, heat of the fire, the movement of the wind. They are called the saddhisa, similar to what? Similar to suchness. Why similar to suchness? You cannot add anything to them. You cannot take away anything from them. So the Buddha teaches his son Rahula, be like earth. The earth does not distinguish between the objects you may like, between the object you don't like. It supports all objects. Be like the water does not distinguish between the ugly objects and the beautiful objects. It splashes everything. You put perfume in it, you put excrements in it, it will splash them. Similarly, the fire will burn anything, it will burn beautiful objects, ugly objects, and the wind will move anything, it will move what we consider to be good, what we consider to be bad. So this reality of the real basis of our perceptions, of our sensations, this reality is similar to suchness. So ultimately, what is dependent, real dependent origination? Neither same nor different. The reality of Faxing, the reality of Fatye, of the Dharma Dhatu, reality of the Dharma body, of the Dharma element, the highest reality, and the reality of the phenomena that we experience is neither same nor different. So the reality of dependent origination is neither same as the ultimate reality, which is changeless, nor different from it. So we come to the non-dualistic realization. In the non-dualistic realization, the inner and the outer are in a perfect state of balance. This is a state of Buddhahood. So I have spoken for 1 hour and a half. I was given instruction to give some time for questions. So now if there are any questions, please let us go through them. It was mentioned in the last lecture that without attaining dhyana and superpowers, one cannot attain enlightenment. How could that be reconciled with pragya vimukti? Does that imply that meditation is not a necessary factor for enlightenment? Now, normally when the Buddha teaches the process in the agamas, when he teaches the process of meditation, he first teaches shamatha, then teaches vipassana. There is only one exception to this rule, and that is in the Samyutta Nikaya, the Susima Sutta. That is very important, and that is a base for this idea that it is possible to attain realization without dhyana, without practicing the 8 liberations. So, of course, there is the Arahat who attains liberation through the so-called dry vipassana, vipassana without the dhyana. This is very nice story, the Susima Sutta. One non-Buddhist practitioner becomes get ordination by the Buddha in order to learn why the Buddhists are so respected. So they must be having supernatural powers, they must be having all the dhyanas and all the liberations. So he wants to learn. He's not a Buddhist, but he wants to steal the Dharma. So he asks the Sangha, do you have the supernatural powers? No, I don't have. Do you have all the samapatis? No, I don't have. Are you realized? Yes, I'm realized. Huh? How is it possible? He does not believe. So this sutta is a base for this idea of the so-called dry vipassana. And of course, dry vipassana is possible. But you need, even for the dry vipassana, you need the power of mind, at least like the proximate, what is called proximate dhyana, upachara dhyana, so that you can differentiate the own and common characteristics of the objects of wisdom. The 5 aggregates, 12 bases, 18 elements. Because you can differentiate these, you can get liberation, provided you understand the whole. According to the principle, you have to understand the whole, penetrate the whole. Understand the whole means the own characteristics of all objects. Penetrate the whole means the common characteristics of all objects, impermanence. Then detach from the whole, and then liberate from the whole. This is the process. So you don't need necessarily the dhyana, but you need at least the power of the mind of upachara samadhi in order to see the arising and passing of all the phenomena of experience moment by moment. So you will see the dependent origination. Dependent origination means the phenomena appearing by causes and conditions and ceasing in the same moment. According to Theravada, by causes and conditions. According to Northern tradition, Abhidharma Kosha, spontaneously. So this is very important. This understanding plays very important role for understanding Yogacara. So unless you understand dependent origination, you cannot get liberation. And you can understand only dependent origination when you understand all the phenomena arise moment by moment, arise due to causes and conditions, and cease at the same moment. When you can see this very clearly, you can penetrate the whole, you can detach from the whole, and you can liberate from the whole. So, but normally the meditation is always taught first practice dhyanas, then on the base of dhyanas you practice the vipassana. This is a standard. Now supernatural powers, you don't need the supernatural powers, but they are highly praised, especially in the path of bodhisattva. You cannot become a real bodhisattva unless you have the supernatural powers. But even if you want to become a disciple Buddha, the supernatural powers are very useful, because a Buddha himself, according to the tradition, attained liberation by using the supernatural powers for vipassana. Namely, under the Bodhi tree, he used the supernatural power of seeing the endless previous lives. Sumingja, Pubenivasa called, and the power of Divya Chakshu, of the divine eye, by which we can see how we beings die and are reborn according to our karma. Normally, without that supernatural power, we cannot actually experience it clearly. So, the supernatural powers are indeed very important, and they can be used for vipassana. And vipassana becomes much more thorough. So, in the commentaries, especially the sub-commentaries of the Agamas, you have different division of the Arahats. You have so-called dry Arahats, who are compared to the what do you call light fly? Yin Huo, 怎么说? Huh? Firefly, huh? They are compared to a firefly because they don't have dhyana, so they don't have supernatural powers. They cannot help many beings. Very difficult. Then you have the both liberated arahats. They are compared to the lamp. They can help much more beings because they have mastered the 8 liberations. Then you have the great arahats, they are like stars. Then you have the Prateka Buddhas, the Buddhas for themselves, they are compared to the moon. And the fully realized Buddha is compared to the star, to the sun. His light can illumine many, many words. So this is the comparison. So the strength of our liberation depends on the strength of the paramis. This is not the idea of Mahayana. It comes even in the commentaries, especially the sub-commentaries of the Agamas, especially Brahmajala Sutta, you can study. Is it all? Okay, could you elaborate more what is direct experience of the object? So this is very important. The direct experience of the object is, using the Abhidharma Kosha idea, is the experience of the object objectively, that is to say, this experience cannot be broken either by, literally by hand or by force or by logic. So the experience of the sensation is the experience of lingna, of receiving the object. No matter whether it is pleasant sensation, unpleasant sensation, neither pleasant nor unpleasant sensation, it will always be the same. It will always be just receiving the object, just lingna. The experience of earth, for example, to come from the mental side of experience to the objective side of experience, to the rupa experience. If you experience this table, when you experience this directly, you don't experience the table, you experience the hardness, which is the element of earth. You experience the temperature, which is the element of fire. You experience the pushing, which is the experience of wind element. And these qualities are put together, which is the experience of water element, cohesion. So this is the direct experience. No matter whether it is a table or whether it is the cup, this will be direct experience which you cannot break. This table you can break, it will not be the table anymore. I can take an axe and it will be just pieces of wood. But you touch these pieces of wood, you will still feel this same hardness. Now I feel hardness because my hand is soft. If it is some very soft object like the paper, so because my hand is more hard, so I feel as softness. So either hardness, softness, smoothness, roughness, heaviness, lightness, these are the characteristics of the earth which will always be there as long as the touch of the material object is there. It will always be there, it cannot be broken, neither by hand, nor by axe, nor by logic. So it is a direct experience. So the Bodhisattva, how does he practice? He keeps to the vastu, he keeps to the thing as it is. That's how he can see how the names and concepts are being superimposed on our mind. So all Buddhists, no matter what kind of Buddhism you practice, all Buddhists agree that the defilements arise based on the concepts, on the names, not on reality. Because we don't experience reality as it is, therefore we are subjected to defilements. And because we are subjected to defilements, we are subjected to karma. And because we are subjected to karma, we either add something to reality or we take away something from reality. And the reality is dependent origination. And dependent origination, this is very important, does not need our names. So when we impose the names on the dependent origination, this dependent origination becomes subjective. And subjectiveness in the Yogacara comes from the alaya. Alaya means the mind which has dwelling. From the Sanskrit root li, which means to stick. Because our mind is sticking, therefore we experience samsara. So our sensations and our mind is not balanced. Samsara is the non-balanced state of mind and sensations. Okay. If we want to be a good meditator and attain wisdom, what should we do in our daily life? Okay, it's very simple. We should practice mindfulness. The difference between a meditator and a non-meditator is that a meditator naturally practices mindfulness. A non-meditator is lost in the jungle of his concepts and likings and dislikings because he does not practice mindfulness. So his mind and sensations are not balanced. Now, the practice of mindfulness is explained in a different way in the traditional Buddhism or in the Buddhism of the Agamas, and it is explained in a different way in the Sutras of Transcendental Wisdom. But the base is the same. The Sutras of Transcendental Wisdom, ultimately they are also based on the traditional meditation. So the traditional meditation is to understand all objects through mindfulness. All objects are objects of mindfulness. That's why the mindfulness is explained, among others, in Abhidharma Kosha as the base for wisdom. Due to mindfulness of the body, you understand the body as the non-self. The body is the object of the self. The self is attached to the body. When you understand that the self is attached to the body, you can understand sensation. Sensation is what the self enjoys. And because the self enjoys sensations, it creates karma, and it is bound by karma. Very important to understand. Now, the mind is the base for the self. If there is no mind, the self has no base. And mind has a job of differentiation, and the samsaric mind differentiates on the base of enjoyment of the sensations. This is the samsaric mind. Now, in order to understand what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, what is neither wholesome nor unwholesome, so we have to understand the phenomena, the dharmas. So the practice of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is explained among others in the Agamas and in Abhidharmakosha as the essence of the practice of mindfulness, is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Now, because we understand the body, we can understand the sensations. Because we understand the sensations, we can understand the samsaric mind. And because we understand the samsaric mind, we can understand what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, what is healthy and what is unhealthy. This is how the practice of the 4 foundations of mindfulness becomes the base for the 37 factors of enlightenment. Without this base, the enlightenment, the process of enlightenment has no base. So only when we have the 4 foundations of mindfulness practice, we can use the right effort. When we use the right effort, we can master the samadhi, we can master the 4 bases for supernatural powers. Then we can penetrate the 5 faculties, balance the 5 faculties, they become the 5 powers. When they become the 5 powers, we can acquire the 7 factors of enlightenment, and the 7 factors of enlightenment is the path of realization, which is the middle path, the Eightfold Noble Path. So this is how the mindfulness is a base for all Buddhist practices. No matter how we explain Buddhism, we need the 37 factors of enlightenment to become enlightened, either as bodhisattvas or as the Buddhas for themselves or as the disciples, the same. If we don't have them, we cannot become Buddhas, the enlightened ones. Now, in the Mahayana practice, we add the skillful means to the practice of mindfulness of non-attainment, putta. You penetrate the body as it is only if you understand that the real body cannot be attained. When you see that the real body cannot be attained, you will understand that sensation also cannot be attained. When the sensation cannot be attained, the mind cannot be attained. When the mind cannot be attained, no Dharma can be attained. So this is how you add the non-dualistic perspective to the practice of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. But in daily life, how do you start? You start by being aware that when you are mindful, your mind is stable on the object of your perception and sensation. When you are not mindful, you are paying attention to one thing and thinking about another thing and doing another thing. So you are in a state of chaos. Because you are in a state of chaos, your sensations are not stable and your mind is not stable. When the sensations and mind is not stable, everything is not stable. Any more questions? Time is over, but let us take one more. So these are the last questions. Otherwise we will never finish. All phenomena are impermanent. Is a Buddha also impermanent? I have just explained the reality is one, not two. Impermanence is only a skillful means for understanding the reality. If reality was only impermanent, and impermanence is suffering, then there is no hope for any liberation. The Buddha is the one who uses wisdom, namely the non-differentiating wisdom, to penetrate the nature of impermanence. This is how one becomes a Buddha. Shamatha is concentration meditation. Concentration in an object. Is the object of the mind the mind? Of course, the ultimate meditation, the ultimate Wu Fen Pie Yin Xiang is the mind itself. This is what is to be realized. The ultimate Wu Fen Pie Yin Xiang, the ultimate object without differentiation is the mind itself. There is no other object without differentiation than the mind itself. That's why we are bound by mind and we are liberated by mind, when we understand this very clearly. So that much for today. 愿以此功德普济一切，我等一众生皆空成佛道。So this is the fourth and last of my public talks, and I hope they may be useful for your further studies and meditation. Thank you very much. Om Mito Bo.